She's back at it again. Yes, I am. Here I am to cause of a little bit more controversy on the internet. No, honestly, this video is in very good fun, and it's actually in response or as a follow-up to a video that I made about 2 weeks ago talking about fiction books that I think will become modern classics. That video went over surprisingly well, much better than I thought it would. I thought I was gonna get absolutely mauled in the comments, but people were pretty understanding for the reasons that I chose the particular books, the particular authors. Some people obviously had some qualms with it, which I totally understand, and I think that they should voice their opinions. And now I'm opening up a completely different can of worms when I'm talking about nonfiction books that I think are going to be considered classics from the 2000 to the 2025 time period. We are in 2025. Ugh, that's crazy to think about. Now, I will say, as I said in the last video, unfortunately, I haven't read every single book that has ever been published. It breaks my heart, my little beating heart. And there are lots of books that are incredibly popular nonfiction that you won't see on this list because I haven't read them. Do I think that they're worthy of being classics? Absolutely. But I just haven't read them, so I can't give you my full-fledged opinion. Also, these are not going to be from every single country in the world. If you don't see your country, I invite you to put your country's recommendation down in the comments, or at least a book that you think is defining of your country. I would love to see that recommendation, as I'm sure a lot of people would. So, let's get into this not controversial at all, incredibly perfect and without any sort of notes list. I have 12 books here in front of me. I did have 13, but one of them I decided, last moment, I don't need it on the list. Let's get rid of it. All right, let's start with number 12. Number 12 is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. Now, this book I don't think is the best book ever written, but I do think that maybe just Kolker in general. I've read another book of his as well called Lost Girls. He's a very great investigative journalist, and I think his powers were a definite display in Hidden Valley Road. If you don't know what this book is about, this is about a family in Colorado. There is a large amount of children, and the majority of the boys in the household are diagnosed with schizophrenia. They would become a blueprint for researchers to understand how schizophrenia develops and how the disease progresses as the boys aged. This was so eye-opening. I think that this is a great way of talking about mental health in a newer generation, really looking into the ways that it was understood and diagnosed in decades past. I think a lot of the boys were born in either the 60s or the 70s, so it was kind of brushed off as, oh, you know, they're just young and there's nothing really going on. But as their traits and their developments as the disease progressed became much worse, it was so much more evident that something was very, very wrong. And I think that this book is a great assessment of a lot of the mental health crises that we've encountered. I will say I've read a lot of mental health books. I think An Unquiet Mind is a great book as well, but that was of course written I think more in like the 80s or 90s. I've read William Styron's Invisible Darkness talking about depression. So there are so many amazing books about mental health, and I'm sure I haven't even touched upon a book that you might suggest as well. But one of the books that I've read that I can attest to being a great contribution to that field of science is Hidden Valley Road. Okay, and then after that I was gonna have a different book, but I replaced it with this one because, you know, I felt like being flirty, fun, and fabulous. And that is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Now, listen, I love this book, okay? This is one of my favorite books. This was honestly a little life-changing for me in the sense that it motivated me to really seek independence in ways that a lot of other books didn't. If you don't know what this story is about, this is about Cheryl Strayed walking the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a, I think, 2,000-mile hike all along the Pacific coast. So it's like Mexico to Canada. This was fantastic. I am a huge outdoor writer, lover. I would put Jon Krakauer on this list, but unfortunately a lot of his books were written in the 90s. Also, Bill Bryson, I think, has a lot of great contributions to outdoor writing as well. A lot of his books that I have read are from the 90s. This was my installation into this list for outdoor writing, outdoor encouragement writing. I think there is a huge field of appreciators for those sorts of books. I remember seeing this everywhere when it came out. God bless that horrific cover, that designer. I have beef with you, okay? So I put off reading it for years and years and years and years and years, and then I finally listened to it on audiobook about 2 years ago, and it blew me away. I loved everything about this. I resonated with this character much more than even the endurance journey that she was going through hiking this trail. It was just more of mental gymnastics of trying to conquer the core of who you are. Of course, there's a lot to do with nature, but a lot of it is just a fundamental wrestling and trying to conquer your inner demons, and I think we can all relate to that in some way. I think this is a great book, and I think that people looking past that horrible cover will cherish this for years to come. Heavy by Kiese Layman. I read this book, maybe 2 years ago as well, and I feel like every time I talk about it on the channel, I say, oh, I never talk about this book enough. But this book really blew me away in the memoir field. You'll notice that this is not the only memoir on this list. This is about Layman's life growing up in Mississippi with like a very structured life. His mother was an intellectual and incredibly harsh on a young Layman. And the title Heavy is a revelation for many different parts of Layman's life. It's about his heaviness, the heaviness of his mother, the burden of his mother. It's about the discrimination that he faced in a school system that was kind of pressing down on him. It was about his weight. He identified in the early chapters of the book that he was a slightly overweight child, and it's about the heaviness of that. It's about the heaviness of guilty conscience when seeing something and not saying something. It's this whole multitude of definitions for the word heavy. You are inhabiting the world of education and the influence of education through Layman's writing. And again, such an important way to show how education can take you from A to B to C to D. And I think it's a really powerful memoir and definitely will be considered a classic for people to pick up in later years. I feel like that's just how I'm pinning, just like ping, okay, the book is done, we're moving on to the next one. But it's true. After that, we're gonna lighten up the mood a little bit. We're gonna have a little bit of fun here at this party, and I'm gonna be talking about one of my writers who I used to talk about all the time on this channel, but I feel like I haven't talked about him in a while because I haven't read one of his books in a while. I think the book that really stuck out with me from this particular writer is Theft by Finding by David Sedaris. Now, okay, maybe that's not his most popular book. Maybe that's not the book that people are going to be considering a classic. You can argue that his tale about being a worker elf in Macy's or Calypso, When You Are Engulfed in Flames, Just Your Family in Corduroy, all of his books have a chance of being a standout. But for me, Theft by Finding, for a nonfiction book, this can't be beat. This is all of David Sedaris' diaries from 1977 to 2002. If you don't know who David Sedaris is, he is a humorist, essayist, and just hilarious individual. I think it's incredibly hard to write funny. I think you can be funny. I think you can act funny. I think you can improv funny. But to write funny is a very particular talent, and David Sedaris does it better than anybody that I know. And I think especially our generation of 2000 to 2025, we're a meme culture, are not as serious. I mean, we're very serious in some situations. So I think for a humorist, it's very important to include them in a list of what we think will be considered classics, because that's a lot of how our generation speaks. I think David Sedaris is a perfect little plop in there because his writing is hilarious to me, and he just captures observations so comically that you can't help but just giggle. Okay, now we're gonna bring it back down to sadness because we can't have fun for too long in this house, all right? When Breath Becomes Air. I read this a couple of years ago as well, and this is not a long book by any means. I would say probably more of like a perfect gift book to give to people. Not in the sense of, exactly in the sense of I'm thinking of you. I think that the scale of this book, the size of it, makes for a way to bridge a connection with someone who is grieving. If you don't know what this book is about, this is written by a neurosurgeon. He was diagnosed with cancer, and when he was diagnosed, he decided to write and document what was happening to him as it was unraveling. This is no spoiler, but the book was published posthumously. The last couple of chapters is his wife eulogizing the man that he was. I think what is important about this book and what this book became was a way for people to comprehend grief, really just trying to break down the fear. Even doctors who are in a field, they should be able to understand and know everything that's going on. In the grips of death, there's really no way to understand what's going to happen to you. And oh my God, I didn't expect to tear up. This, I think, spoke to so many people that were going through something, and it will be remembered for its vulnerability and the way that I think when people want to be doctors, they want to give back to people. And I think this was a final way to give back to people. Oh my God. Oh. And now we're going to go onto a book that probably won't make you cry. Maybe this is a testament to the author much more than the actual book. But I think that if we're going to talk about 2000s to 2025, somebody who's writing great biographies and just nonfiction stories, that is Walter Isaacson. But I would say the one that is very defining of this era is the Steve Jobs biography. I was a huge Steve Jobs person, and I saw so much hope and so much excitement when iPhones came about. I wanted a Mac so badly, and we got a Mac computer when I was young, and I couldn't get off it. I was obsessed with it. I think there's no more defining features for the 2000s than the internet and how rapidly it ascended. And who was a pioneer of that? Steve Jobs. Love him or hate him. There's a lot of things in this book that will make you hate him. He was not a happy person to be around. He had a lot of demons in his closet and was not painted in any sort of positive way in this book. It's just a very fact-based narrative and a really great piece of biography. Number 6, so halfway there. Is this about the time that I tell you about the book that I wanted to put on here, was thinking about putting on? Yeah, why not? 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. I don't know why I was thinking about putting this on there. I think it was because it was so popular. I think at the time it was like a celebration of women and their sexuality. I do think that it's definitely not representative of all women by any means. It's very narrow in the chosen 3. I almost put it on this list, but then I reframed the list and thought about books that really were the time periods, and I don't think that that one makes the list. But let me know your thoughts. All right, so now properly number 6, The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. I've talked about this book quite a bit on the channel, so if you've been on the channel before, this is not a random input. I've talked about how this book kind of changed me when I was on my journey of reading. I remember picking this book up in a thrift store in Denver, Colorado, and I had seen this amazing cover everywhere. That is such a stop in your tracks cover. I didn't really know what it was about. If you don't know what it's about Nelson's relationship to her partner, artist Harry Dodge. It's about gender identity, it's about sexuality, it's about how we present ourselves, and it's very philosophical. But I think what makes this effective and what made it so popular was that it was accessible philosophy, which, if you've been on this channel again, you know is something that I'm a huge proponent of. I do think that there are moments of this book that I'm like, I remember the first sentence of this is kind of like, oh, you really want to get to the audience. Rock on. You got him. Okay, you got him. But I remember being so moved by this. This made me want to write, and I was writing for a little while after this. And I think that's the power of a book that is inviting the audience to experience something new, inviting the audience to get on this level of comprehension that maybe they're not used to. Be really keen to pick it up again. And I think a lot of people will look back on this book as being really informative for the time. All right, sister. Now we're into the top 5, and this is in the same vein as Walter Isaacson. This is also an author who I think for the 2000s opened the door and said, I'm here and I'm gonna write some big ass books about history that are non-fiction, obviously. But I'm gonna write these big best-selling books about things and you're gonna love them. And that author is Erik Larson. I love Erik Larson. I've read a lot of his books. The book that I think is most representative of the 2000s onward is Devil and the White City. Now, the reason that I chose this book is because I think it really gets into the infatuation that we would have with true crime. Obviously, you have In Cold Blood, which was at that time incredibly astonishing, incredibly moving, and incredibly profound. So there was already that audience for true crime. I think what Devil in the White City did was it just took it and molded it with history and just showed you that this has been going on forever, and now we have all of these facts to bring forth and this story to present, and it's so much more interesting now that we have the full picture. This is about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and it is talking about the rise of this industrialization and this huge promise for Chicago competing to be the biggest city in the United States, trying to prove themselves, put on this massive World's Fair, while at the same time, parallel to the development of Chicago is this notorious murderer, H.H. Holmes, who is going on this savage killing spree, murdering young women that are flocking into Chicago to try to improve their lives. It's so fascinating. This is my most reread book to this day. I have read it so many times and I love it. Erik Larson is a beast in the craft of writing nonfiction. So good, and I can't suggest his books enough. And now we are into the top 4. I had to do a really quick count. Subi. Number 4 is Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. If you don't know what The Year of Magical Thinking is about, it is about her husband passing incredibly quickly and the sickness of a child. I think that Didion is a master of her craft, truly. I have said this before, but I wanted to be a Didion hater. I did. Year of Magical Thinking, come on. It's a celebrated book already. I don't think it's a stretch to say that it's a classic, kind of the moment that it came out. And Didion is a master, and I'd be interested to read the book that was just published posthumously. I don't know. I think just knowing that Didion was here to talk about this book and truly delve and give information about her words in that moment, her emotional state, is really important. Posthumously, sure, I'm sure it's great for the estate, but I think there's something special in knowing that she was still very much alive and mourning somebody who very much was not alive, which was her husband, and being able to depict that scene in her life and just talk about it in very frank and understanding ways. Number 3, we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I have a story about the first time that I read this. This was, 2019? I was just getting back into reading. I was hungover as all hell. I was still drinking at that point in my life. And I decided, you know what? Oh, did I mention it was my birthday? It was my birthday, and I thought, you know, I'm gonna buy myself a book. And I just went into a bookstore, and the first book that caught my eye was In the Dream House. And I thought, okay, yeah, this sounds interesting. I read that book in a day. Okay, I read that hungover, and that is not an easy book to read hungover because it's a puzzle of words. It's a puzzle of a story. This is all fragmented stories, and it's a take on the horror genre. Like, different horror tropes are investigated in every single chapter to tie together this full story. It's all about an abusive relationship that Machado had. This doesn't feel gimmicky. It feels very intentional, and it feels like there's backing behind every structural choice that Machado makes. And an interesting way to kind of parallel what Machado was thinking at that time, trying to rationalize a relationship that she so fervently believed in. And obviously, it was not good for her or the both of them. and the way that it's structurally conveyed is really, really successful. Number 2. This book was everywhere. I think it's also a testament to the author. I think the author is a really, really good nonfiction writer. I've read Rogues by this author. I'm also interested to read Empire of Pain by this author. But the book that I'm choosing by this author, because it is the book that I have read, is Say Nothing by Raden Keefe. This book, you go into any bookstore, it's there. Top 10 nonfiction reads. All of the people recommend it. It's there. You know it. Yeah, this book is really good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite nonfiction book that I've read, but if you're not really keen on reading nonfiction, I think this is a great story to get into. Again, we're looking at true crime, okay? But this book doesn't really sit in that true crime world forever. It's much more exploring the consequences of a life. This is about the troubles in Northern Ireland, specifically focusing on members of the IRA, even more specifically focusing on 2 sisters, Dolores and Marion Price. I think the most impressive part of this book for me is just how different members were unveiled and just kind of their life, how it staggered, really truly the consequences of things, decisions that they made, choices that were impulsive, or choices that were made because they had to be made. Just seeing how the trajectories of their lives continued was so impressive. Spans decades, and that's always a really fun story to read. And my number 1. This is a choice for me and my inner child. And I think a lot of people's inner childs. I think a lot of artistic kids' inner childs. I think a lot of people who just felt seen by this author and their words. And maybe we all fantasized about living this life at some point. I know I did. I know I fantasized about having an artistic beauty in my world, having a muse, having a friend. And that is, if you couldn't guess, Just Kids by Patti Smith. I remember when I read this book, I was still living at home, and it just opened up my eyes and made me feel like I could do anything. This is about Patti Smith. She moved into New York City. She fell in with this group of creatives, and it's really a love letter to her friend Robert Mapplethorpe, who, if you don't know who Robert Mapplethorpe was, he was a famous photographer who unfortunately passed from AIDS. She highlights the highs and the lows of their love, their relationship, their friendship. She does it in a way that makes you feel like you're there with her. You feel a nostalgia for this time that you didn't even live in. At least for me, I didn't live in the Chelsea Hotel in that time period in New York City, but you feel nostalgic because all of us have felt that sort of love for somebody, whether it's a friend, whether it's a relative, whether it's a lover. We've felt that love, that nurturing love of wanting to always be there for someone. And that is what this book is about. It's about youth. It's about understanding who you are. It's about finding yourself. It's about creativity. And in a time where we feel like our lives are so Instagrammable, or we want to curate a life, this really shows you just the base of what's important, and it's so good. I have to put it at number 1. It was a very easy choice. I read a decent amount of nonfiction, definitely more fiction, but a decent amount. I've read great ones, but this was a no-brainer for me. I had to choose it as number 1. It's very easy for me to choose. So, really, this was much harder of a list to make than the fiction that I made, but I'm always open to any sort of suggestions. I would actually love to hear suggestions. Please let me know. Of course, this isn't the definitive list, but I think it's a pretty good start. So, you guys are wonderful. You're fabulous. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, this sweater is hot and my hair is fluffing out from the humidity, but I will survive. And I will see you in the next